Sometimes power enters quietly, and no one notices, until it's too late. You people can't even read. The words sliced through the air like a whip, cutting the silence clean in half. No warning. No decency. Judge Ray Whitaker didn't even lift his eyes. His voice carried arrogance, a stain in a room meant for justice. "What are you doing in my courtroom?" In the back corner, a man paused, mid-sweep, broom frozen in motion. Blue shirt. Quiet hands. Calm breath. But inside, something smoldered. Laughter bubbled from the attorney's table. The bailiff smirked. The room followed the judge's lead like dogs chasing a whistle. Daryl James looked down, not from shame but to cage the fire behind his eyes. "You deaf too?" The judge chuckled again, darker this time. "Must be hard pushing a broom when you can't read signs that say, 'Authorized personnel only.'" The bailiff stepped forward. No hesitation. Ready to escort the janitor out. Daryl said nothing. He leaned the broom softly against the wall. He turned. Walked. Didn't defend. Didn't explain. But just before the door closed behind him, something small fluttered off the judge's desk. An unopened letter. No one noticed the signature at the bottom. Daryl James. President. James Family Foundation. They thought they saw a cleaner. They had no idea who they had just brushed aside. They thought they saw a janitor. But they were looking at the architect of justice. Outside the courtroom, Daryl sat alone on the courthouse bench. The mop bucket beside him hadn't moved. He wasn't numb. He was focused. It wasn't the first insult. But it stung more than the others, because it came from the man wearing the robe of justice. He'd heard words like that before. From landlords who wouldn't rent to his kind. From professors who questioned how someone like him could write an essay that powerful. From lawyers who thought men with brooms didn't carry thoughts in their pockets. What the judge didn't know. This very courtroom, this same building, had nearly shut down a civil rights case months ago. The funds were gone. Hope fading. Until an anonymous donor stepped in. That donor was Daryl. He had been one of the sharpest civil rights attorneys in the state. Until a setup buried his name. Until they took everything, his license, his career, his voice. But they couldn't take his conviction. So he built something bigger. The James Family Foundation. Now, it funded over 60% of civil rights appeals in the entire state. The case inside courtroom 3C today? A wrongful eviction of a single black mother and her son? 100% funded by him. And now he had been thrown out of that courtroom, like dust on marble. His phone buzzed once. One name lit up, Rachel Bloom. Senior counsel on the case. Daryl typed just one line. "I'm going to make an appearance. Clear the air." 15 minutes later, courtroom 3C was full again. The judge returned from recess, smirking. Confident. Unbothered. Now where were we? He scanned the room like prey in a cage. Ah, yes. The defense's ridiculous claim that this eviction was racially motivated. He chuckled. Let's get this circus over with. But this wasn't the same courtroom anymore. Something was about to shift. Your Honor, Rachel Bloom stood, her voice steady but electric. Before we proceed, I respectfully request to introduce a silent party who has the right to be present in this hearing. Judge Whitaker raised an eyebrow, already half amused. Is this another PR stunt, Ms. Bloom? No, sir, she said. She turned. And then he entered. No broom. No uniform. No shame. Gasps floated across the gallery like cold wind. Daryl James stepped forward in a tailored navy suit. Crisp white shirt. Polished brown shoes. He didn't need to announce anything. His presence did it for him. For a moment even the judge leaned forward, confused. Who is this? He asked, not knowing he had already insulted him. Publicly. Loudly. Fatally. Rachel smiled. The man you mocked earlier as illiterate is Mr. Daryl James. Founder and president of the James Family Foundation. The primary funder of this civil rights lawsuit. The same name that was on the sponsorship letter your clerk tossed aside this morning. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier than wood and stone. The judge's face went pale. And then, Daryl spoke. His voice wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. You asked what I was doing in your courtroom, Your Honor, he said, eyes locked on the bench. I was watching. Watching how justice would be served, in a case I personally funded. He took one step closer. But when you saw me with a broom, you assumed I had no place here. Every breath in the room tightened. Even the air felt like it was holding its tongue. The judge opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain. But nothing came out. You didn't need to recognize me, Daryl continued. You just needed to treat me like a human being. The bailiff, now back at his post, looked at the ground. The court reporter had stopped typing. No one dared to move. Then Daryl turned. He looked at the plaintiff's table. At the mother and her young son sitting quietly, Miss Carter and her boy. Victims of a system stacked against them. Daryl took a brown folder from his side. Handed it to Rachel. Inside, notarized documentation. A private fund to cover their housing for the next 3 years, no matter how the trial ended. You're not alone, Daryl said softly. Whatever this court decides today, your dignity will remain untouched. Rachel clutched the folder. Her hands shook, not from fear but from knowing they were finally being seen. Daryl stepped back. No fanfare. No applause. I never needed recognition, he said. I just wanted to see if this courtroom remembered what justice looked like. He turned. Walked out. The door closed behind him. And still no one spoke. No one breathed. But someone watched. Later that afternoon, courtroom footage was quietly reviewed. Not to track Daryl, but to examine the judge. Whispers started spreading like wildfire. In legal circles they didn't call it a scandal. They called it what it was, a failure of character. And something else too. A silent internal notice. A reprimand. And the warning, courtroom 3C would never run the same again. But Daryl? He returned to the same hallway the next morning. Same slow walk. Same blue shirt. Same cart. And yet, now something was different. Every time he passed a courtroom door, people stood up. Not because he was powerful. Because he had reminded them what presence really meant. But that courtroom didn't fall silent because it was empty. It fell silent because every soul inside it was trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Later that day, when Judge Whitaker returned to his chambers, he didn't speak to anyone. Not the clerk. Not the bailiff. Not even his own reflection. His hand hovered over the gavel, but this time he couldn't bring himself to lift it. Across town, in a cramped office above a nonprofit clinic, Rachel opened the folder Daryl had handed her again. Inside wasn't just financial documentation. It was history, old court files, names and cases from years ago. Patterns. There it was. The second page. The name of the judge who had signed off on Daryl's disbarment 2 decades ago. Ray Whitaker. Same judge. Same courtroom. And this wasn't the first time he'd silenced a black attorney. A sharp breath escaped Rachel's lips. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. That night, the footage made its way onto a private legal review board. No headline. No noise. But behind closed doors, a file was reopened. And a name resurfaced. Daryl James. The board began quietly re-evaluating his disbarment. Was it time to reverse what was stolen? Meanwhile, Daryl stood outside the same building where he used to argue high-profile cases. Only now, he pushed a mop across the marble floor of the lobby. One intern passed him, slowed, turned back. You were in courtroom 3C yesterday, weren't you? Daryl didn't look up. I was. The intern swallowed hard. They're saying you used to practice law? I used to fight. Daryl paused. I never stopped. The intern stared. Unsure whether to say thank you, or I'm sorry. But before he could speak, Daryl moved on. Rachel called him later that evening. They're looking into it, Daryl. Quietly. No promises. But the board's reading your old case again. The disbarment. Daryl was silent for a moment. Then, I didn't come back to reopen old wounds. You didn't, Rachel replied. But truth has a way of cracking open locked doors. He almost smiled. Almost. Let me know if I should continue with segments 7 and 8, where things escalate further. Public exposure, another courtroom reversal, and a final test for Daryl. Shall I proceed? They didn't announce it on the news. But lawyers talk. Judges whisper. And word had already started leaking into corridors where justice is often negotiated in hushed tones. A disbarred attorney. A civil rights donor. A judge with a buried past. The pieces didn't match until they did. 3 days after Daryl's quiet return to court, a former legal journalist caught wind of it. She found a photo, an old one, of Daryl James standing outside the very courthouse 2 decades ago in a sharp gray suit, a legal prodigy. And right beside him? Judge Ray Whitaker. Smiling. Younger. Back when betrayal was still new. The photo hit a private newsletter that night. No headlines. Just one line beneath it. Guess who's cleaning up the courtroom now? The next morning, Whitaker arrived earlier than usual. His hands trembled. On his desk, placed neatly, was a fresh manila envelope. No return address. Inside, transcripts from the trial that broke Daryl's career. Notes in red ink. Dates. Voided pages. Witness statements that never made it to the stand. Someone had kept everything. And now, it was back in front of him. He gripped the papers tightly, but they shook anyway. Meanwhile, Rachel walked into a small community center where Daryl was hosting a weekend reading program. He didn't speak at first. He rarely did when he was surrounded by kids. But today something was different. "They reopened your case officially," she said under her breath, kneeling beside him. Daryl didn't stop reading. But his hands gripped the book tighter. "They're requesting a formal hearing next week. Full review. Everything." "I don't want my name back," Daryl whispered. Rachel looked at him. "Why not?" "Because if they give it back, they'll pretend they never stole it." She stood quietly. That wasn't defeat in his voice, it was resistance. Mature. Controlled. But it wasn't over. That night, Rachel received a call she never expected. It wasn't from the board. It wasn't from the court. It was from the same journalist who published the photo. "I think you need to see something," she said. Rachel met her in a parked car 2 blocks from the courthouse. No lights. Just tension. The journalist handed her a USB. "What's on it?" Rachel asked. The woman looked her in the eyes. "A video," she said. "Footage from 20 years ago. From the day Daryl was disbarred." Rachel plugged it into her laptop. And there it was. Security footage, grainy but clear, of a backroom meeting. Judge Ray Whitaker, 2 senior attorneys, and a third man shaking hands. A cash envelope on the table. No sound. But the truth didn't need audio. Rachel sat frozen. The video spread like wildfire. But not to the public. Not yet. First, it hit inboxes marked confidential. Judicial board members. Ethics committees. 2 investigative journalists. And 1 person who hadn't spoken in years, Daryl's former co-counsel from the case that ruined him. Rachel watched it 5 times. Every frame felt like a punch. The silent handshake. The envelope. The signatures that followed. It wasn't just unethical. It was orchestrated. And Daryl was the target. 2 days later he was called in, not to testify, not to defend, but to accept. The board wanted to reinstate his license. Fully. Retroactively. They said the word apology 4 times. Daryl said nothing. He just listened. Then he stood. "I don't need the robe to protect people," he said. "And I don't need a title to know I was right." They looked confused. He didn't care. He walked out before they could finish reading the statement they had prepared for press. That same afternoon, Rachel arrived at the courthouse. The wrongful eviction case was still in session. She requested one last motion. A chance to speak directly to the judge. Not Whitaker, he'd been quietly removed from the case. Reassigned indefinitely. Another judge took his place. Rachel approached the bench. "We are withdrawing our funding from this lawsuit," she said. The room stirred. And replacing it with something else. She turned toward the gallery. Toward the plaintiff's table. And then, toward the back. Daryl stepped forward. In his hand, a new foundation agreement. One that made Miss Carter not just a recipient, but the first community director. "You won't just win your case," Daryl said. "You'll help rewrite how these cases are even fought." After the hearing, someone caught him in the hallway. "You're not taking your license back?" they asked. Daryl looked out the courthouse window. "I already took something more important." "What's that?" He paused. "My voice." 2 weeks passed. Courtroom 3C still ran its sessions, but something was different now. New judge. New eyes. New energy. No one dared speak over the silent workers anymore. Every janitor. Every clerk. Every visitor. They were looked at differently now. Because once, a man with a broom walked in. And walked out holding the room's respect like a flag no one could burn. Across the city, a ribbon cutting happened in a quiet neighborhood. No reporters. No sponsors. Just locals. Residents. Families. The building wasn't tall. But what it held was enormous. The James Center for Legal Access. Free counsel. Civil rights education. And a long hallway lined with portraits. Not of Daryl. But of the people he funded. The ones who fought. The ones who won. Rachel stood by the front door, greeting guests. "Is he coming?" one woman asked. Rachel smiled. He already did. Far from the city noise, Daryl James stood at a small park, broom in hand. Not because he had to. Because it kept him grounded. A little girl passed him with a popsicle, looked up and asked, "Are you the man from the courthouse?" He knelt beside her. "I was." "You look different there." He nodded. "I needed to." Why? Daryl looked at her. Then at the path behind him. So the next time someone like you walks in, they don't have to. She smiled, not fully understanding, but feeling something in her bones. And she ran ahead, leaving behind sticky footprints on the stone path. Daryl watched. Silent. Steady. Present. Some legacies are carved in stone. In silence. In memory. In the way a room holds its breath, when presence walks in wearing humility like armor. He didn't need the last word. He already lived it.